Hey people, welcome to the Run Testers. It's Kieran here, and in this video we're going to be talking about carbon shoes. Now, with prices of carbon shoes going all the way up to like £250, and every brand pretty much having a horse in the race these days, we thought it'd be interesting to catch up with somebody who's been doing a little bit of digging, actual science, on whether or not all carbon shoes add the same kind of performance improvements. So a little bit earlier, we caught up with Dustin Joubert. He's the study lead on a study out of Stephen F. Austin State University that looked at a range of the latest carbon shoes and how they affected running economy and performance. So before you go out and spend those big bucks, if you want to know if all carbon shoes offer the same bang for buck, you've come to the right place. So Dustin, thanks very much for joining us on the Run Testers. Pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I guess as a sort of jumping off point, could you just tell us the story about kind of what inspired you to sort of take on this study in the first place?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a long-term runner myself. And then, over the last 3 or 4 years, seeing the shoe advancements, watching the Kipchoge sub 2 success. Obviously been tracking the shoes, some of the research that was done on the original Vaporfly line of shoes and stuff, and got a little bit more serious with my own running again in the last year and a half, 2 years. And ran my first marathon. I was like, okay, I'll give some of these carbon shoes a try. And I bought a pair of the Hoka Carbon X's. I thought the stiffness, the rigidity of them, I could feel a difference. I wasn't sure much beyond that. Suffered through my first marathon, bonked really hard. And then it was time to buy a second pair. And I was like, well, the second line of that shoe was out, but I didn't really know if they were helping my running economy at all. So I just jumped on the treadmill in the lab with the metabolic cart and compared them to my just regular old racing flat, and didn't see any differences, didn't see any improvements. So I said, okay, well, I'm not going to buy the second iteration of that shoe. The Alpha Flies were available at that time, so I gave them a try before taking them out on the roads. I tested them on the treadmill on myself, and sure enough, I was 4.5% better running economy when at like 7 miles per hour and 7-minute mile pace and 6-minute mile pace. So that was kind of a shock to me there, that I was like, okay, there are big differences here in what we're calling super shoes. And obviously if you get online at look in the kind of running shoe banter that's out there, there's people are undecided on like which shoe is better than another and which shoe is the best, and if it's worth the money. And so I decided, well, let's see if we can compare as many of these shoes as possible and see how they stack up.
So you briefly mentioned kind of what you did to test the effect of the kind of Carbon X2 and the Alpha Fly. So I wonder, if you explain how exactly you do go about testing the performance of a super shoe in the lab.
Running economy is a measure of kind of two ways you can look at it: the oxygen cost to run at a given speed, so like the submaximal VO2 to run at a given speed, and you would want that to be lower, to require less percentage of your aerobic capacity to work at a given speed, which also goes hand in hand with the energy cost or the metabolic cost, so how many calories it actually takes to run at that speed, which obviously you don't want to be expending less energy, depleting your energy stores less. But ultimately, if you can enhance economy, not only does it let you work at a given speed with less energy or less effort, but in turn, you could go faster at the same effort. And so that's the really link to improving performance. So the way that we measure that in the lab, you guys have seen someone like hooked up to a metabolic cart with a mask. And by measuring your respiratory gas exchange, your oxygen consumption, your CO2 production, we can determine those things. And so we can look, the general protocol for measuring economy in the lab is you're at a fixed speed on the treadmill. We need you there probably 3 to 5 minutes. 5 minutes is what we typically do. And we can look at your steady state oxygen consumption over those last couple minutes to see what your metabolic rate is and your energy expenditure is.
It would be great if you could just sort of explain a little bit for our watchers how you went about kind of testing out the shoes, which shoes you selected, and then what you got the runners who came into the lab to be the guinea pigs, what you got them to do.
Yeah, so for the shoe study comparison, we were able to end up getting 7 carbon plated shoes. So had a limited budget, got some internal funding, so I didn't have any funding from shoe companies. Worked with a buddy who runs a specialty run store to try to get some discounts, but we were able to test the Nike Alpha Fly, Vaporfly 2, Metaspeed Sky, Saucony Endorphin Pro, New Balance RC Elite, Brooks Hyperion Elite 2, Hoka Rocket X, and then we had a control shoe, just a standard flat. So quite a bit. Didn't get to test everything possible, but really the goal of the project was not necessarily to say like, oh, this is the one best shoe and these shoes are all bad. It was really to say like across the broad landscape of the running shoe market of these carbon plated shoes, like how have things stack up now? And so having one shoe missing or having this shoe here and not there wasn't that big a concern, in the sense that we're trying to more make a comparison across the broad landscape of things. And so those were the 8 shoes. We were able to get 12 subjects. The fitness criteria. So with running economy testing, you need to make sure that you're doing the testing below the lactate threshold, so that we know that the energy contributions are primarily coming from aerobic metabolism, because we're just measuring oxygen consumption. We can't really quantify anaerobic metabolism through respiratory gas exchange like that. So to test people at, let's say what we did was 16 kilometers per hour, basically 6-minute mile pace. To test people at those speeds, you need people who can run considerably faster than that, because that needs to be basically like slower than their tempo pace, slower than their lactate threshold pace. So the criteria kind of that when you look at some of the performance conversions that we set, it was 17:30 5K. So not like super elite runners, but definitely fit age group and beyond. So we had a mix of collegiate runners and some competitive age groupers and stuff. We had several of our subjects just ran Boston last week. So what we did for the 8 shoes is basically we tested on 2 visits. So each shoe was tested twice on each subject. They did 8 5-minute trials. So 1 5-minute trial on each of the shoes with a 5-minute break between each shoe to rest and change shoes. And then we did that on 2 visits so that we could like randomize the order and then mirror the order on the second visit. So we take the average across those, limit some of the variability, limit some of the sequence effect or any kind of order effect. And then we made comparisons between shoes from there.
Fantastic. And then I guess let's get a fun key question out of the way. So which shoes did well and which shoes did not so well?
So as maybe we would expect from the previous lit that's been done on the Vaporfly line, that shoe was in the top tier. The Alpha Fly, which you would expect to perform similarly, the Zoom X foam and some other unique components to it now with the AirPods and such, but the Alpha Fly really hadn't been looked at in any kind of published research lit to this point. So it stacked up top tier along with the Vaporfly. And then the only shoe that matched up to those 2 Nike shoes was the Asics Metaspeed Sky in our lineup. So those from like a statistical comparison standpoint were all in like 2.5 to 3% improvement range. And those were statistically different than the other shoes in the lineup. The Endorphin Pro and the RC Elite 1 from New Balance, those were kind of second tier, around a 1.5% improvement in economy, but significantly worse than those top tiered shoes. And then the shoes that didn't have any improvement relative to the control shoe were the Brooks Hyperion Elite 2 and the Hoka Rocket X.
So I guess my next question then, really, having gone through the study and sort of looked at this yourself, are there shoes that you'd advise people kind of against spending money on in that sense?
I'll let people interpret that for themselves, given that decisions on what shoes to wear are more multifaceted, right, than just our single running economy measurement in the lab, right? So I don't think our findings discount the importance of like comfort and preference and brand loyalty someone might have or any of these other things, right? From a personal standpoint, certainly, I'm going to make some pretty strong shoe decisions when it comes to racing based on this data. And I have personal testing data on myself on all these shoes too. So I personally am a big responder in the Alpha Fly, even compared to those other top shoes that we looked at. I get an extra percentage point boost in the Alpha Fly. So as long as my foot can handle it and I don't have any issues with it, I'm running in that shoe, right, for racing purposes. When you talk about training purposes, I think that's not really the comparisons we're making here. So.
And I had one sort of follow-up question. I guess a couple of things that people that we've talked about this study to have come back. One of them is running on a treadmill, running short versus running on the roads and running long. How does the study kind of scale out into sort of people running marathons on roads?
Yeah, so I think kind of two considerations there. One is the surface. So the treadmill surface can be slightly different than the roads, depending on like, the hardness or the impact. And then the length of the measurement. So it's pretty common to measure running economy the way we did on 5-minute bouts. I know people think, well, that's really short, but for submaximal exercise below threshold, we shouldn't see huge changes in like the oxygen cost or the energy cost of that task if I had to do it for 30 minutes versus 5 minutes. Now I could see that, and there is a little bit of research like that on running economy during like more prolonged bouts of exercise. Your economy gets worse. It would make more sense. You damage more muscle, and maybe your recruitment patterns change as you fatigue, and the energy cost becomes greater later into a race. And we don't really know if that changes like the relative differences between these shoes. I could see a reasonable hypothesis that maybe those percent differences are even larger later in a race, right? If they've also helped prevent some muscle damage and stuff. But we haven't really seen comparisons between shoes during a really prolonged bout. So I would think the percentages at least stand up to what we see in shorter though, if not bigger. And then the treadmill surface thing, I think the chief criticism I've seen of our paper is we tested on a woodway treadmill, which is a little softer. And there's some research to show that like the harder surface treadmills will actually result in worse running economy. And so, but we don't really know if like the relative differences between shoes changed for that. I've tested myself on our woodway and our harder surface treadmill that I've done more of the testing on lately, and my relative percentages are very similar. If anything, they're even smaller on the more recent testing I've done on the harder treadmill. But in terms of like, if you want to be able to say, okay, 4% in the lab equals how much faster speed on the road, that becomes more important for making like the relative comparisons between shoes that we did here. I think it's less of an issue. But if you want to say, all right, you were 3% better in the Alpha Fly in the lab, that should, at varying speeds, depending on the speed and wind resistance and such, correspond to this much improvement on the road. That could be affected maybe like the more your lab conditions mirror the road conditions.
Sample size, I guess, is another one. And we spoke before, Dustin, and you explained why sample size isn't necessarily, a smaller sample doesn't really matter necessarily when you're doing a piece of science like this.
Yeah, so I think some people's knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, 12 subjects. Well, that's not enough to, tell us anything. But a lot of those people aren't statisticians who make those knee-jerk responses, I think, sometimes. So there is a means to where we like estimate the number of subjects we would need to power the study to find significant differences between shoes. I'd say, I'm not a statistician. I don't teach statistics, but we're more concerned with a small sample size when we don't find differences between things. That's more of a concern if your study's underpowered. So we found differences between things here. We have effect size estimates from previous studies that we can determine sample size needed to find significance. And so we did all that. So I think more of a concern maybe is not, did you have enough subjects to reach good statistical conclusions? We have that. More of a concern might be like from an external validity standpoint, how do you take our findings here and make more population-wide generalizations from that? And so we looked at fairly fast age group men, and small weight range, 135 to 160 pounds probably. Sorry for my US units here. So that probably, and at one speed at 6-minute mile pace, 16 kilometers per hour. So that I think is more like, you say, what were those 12 subjects like? That affects more the generalizability that you make. We know from the other studies, we've seen the shoes benefit people from both men and women at 14 to 18 kilometers per hour with similar range of improvements. So we can say probably from what we saw there, we'd expect similar things here, but yeah.
And then when we go back to those kind of 3 shoes that did stand out a little bit more in the study, it seems to be like, we've kind of talked about this in the channel actually a few times doing reviews, is you can't really just whack a carb plate in a shoe and expect it to work magic. And the foam maybe is underrated, and this study maybe really suggests that the foam is as critical, if not more important, maybe to performance.
Yeah, I think so. In there's a recent paper by Healy and Hokamer that I just like the design of it. They sliced up the carbon plate and showed that the Vaporfly performed similarly in terms of economy with the sliced up plate versus not sliced up plate. So the ZoomX foam is doing a lot. I think the carbon plate in those shoes with the high stack squishy foams, the carbon plate probably, is important for the integrity of the shoe. And, but yeah, I think the foam is the big player. And that's the tough thing, is just the foam, where like the raw materials that go into the foam and like the polymers, the EVA, TPU, PIBA are kind of a set thing. What the shoe companies do with it in the manufacturing process from there is really a mystery. And you can get on the shoe companies' websites and try to figure out what's in their midsole foam, and it's all these proprietary names that they use. And I've really honestly tried to just not even figure it out. The properties of the foam are certainly important. If you look at the original Vaporfly paper done out of the CU Boulder group, the Hochhammer paper, they actually did, it was a Nike supported study. And I think it was actually in the Nike lab where they had the data on sort of like when you compress the foam, how compressible it is, how compliant it is. And that's important for how much energy the foam can store. And then in turn, how much it springs back, how much resiliency it has. And that's, percentage of the energy you put into it that you get back. Those are really key properties. And in that original Vaporfly line, they showed, I think it's like 87% of the energy is returned, and it also stores more energy because it's more compressible, compliant. So I think when you start thinking about like these different foams, and you can kind of experience this yourself, right? Like you squish them and you step in them and you feel like, okay, well, this one feels like it bounces back some, but it doesn't compress in any, right? Or this one doesn't do either. I think it would be nice if there was just like somebody testing all you need like a soft materials engineering lab to do this, and they need like a shoe last that compresses the foam. And it would be nice if we just had that data on all the shoes. Someone was doing that, and I think we probably need less of this human research. Translating it to running economy, we would know a lot more about the foam than any name of it would give us, right?
And I guess there's for some of it there's commercial sense in maybe leaving your sort of secret sauce of the foams as a secret sauce, not letting people necessarily know. And I guess one of the things that pops into my head about this is that idea of, if you've chosen a race shoe that you go and run a PB in, chances are you'll either recommend that shoe or your next race you're going to be wearing that shoe again. How much, for some of the shoes, how much can, I guess placebo, for want of a better word, I'm throwing out sort of other terms, but can a placebo almost do as much as some of the shoes that you sort of found in the findings? Is there something sort of, is there correlations in that sense?
Well, I think you point to this idea of translating a single laboratory measurement, which we know is a really important endurance exercise performance determinant, running economy that is, but translating that to actual performance improvements, right? Performance is so multifaceted. There's so many things that, right, could go wrong or right on race day. So it's harder to do this research like in time trial based studies, just because there's so much more variability, right? It's like, okay, this guy won this race in the Adios Pro 2, but would he have run faster in the, Vaporfly? We don't know. We can't replicate all of those things perfectly, right? We're not gonna, especially if on these longer distance events, right? So yeah, I think, in terms of marginal gains, if you're getting a percentage or two here from a shoe, but yeah, you feel great and, psychologically are better off in this other one, then yeah, maybe those things wash out. It's the reason we try to control everything in the laboratory is to say other things equal, what is this one component, right? What does this one intervention do? But in the real world, yeah, things are complicated. So if that affects something else in the bigger picture, then surely some things could get washed out. But
and then for shoe selection, when we talk about, I guess some of us runners are guilty of, we'll sort of pick a shoe to go for a 5K or go for a 10K up to a half marathon. We might sort of favour one shoe over another that has a carbon plate. Is there actually an argument to say that once you've found the shoe that works for you in terms of this kind of running economy, that you should stick it on and wear it, terrain and conditions being right, running fast around a bend on a track, maybe sort of take it into account, but you should just stick with that shoe, doing like a road 10K, a road half marathon, a road marathon, find the shoe and stay with that one.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And we've talked about that previously. It's just like when people review shoes, they're like, oh, this shoe feels great for a marathon, but I would go down to this one for the half marathon, right? And to me, certainly in that range of distance, half marathon to marathon, I don't really with these, the fact that the Alpha Fly is improving economy equally or more so than the shoes that are lighter than it, I don't really think that way anymore, right? So me personally, I'm going to run the Alpha Fly everything 5K and up, probably for me even a mile. It gets interesting the shorter distance. So I think, yes, if you improve economy, anything that's like primarily aerobic above the lactate threshold, so like for most people, it's going to be 10K and up. I think the shoe that gives you the best advancements in economy, best improvements in economy is probably the right shoe from a performance standpoint. And so I think that becomes more of an issue, right? If it's like, okay, the best shoe for me economically is like this really light shoe without a lot of cushioning. And I'm trying to go up longer in distance to like say a marathon, and I feel like that's not going to protect me enough, then that's right. That's more of a concern. But if the opposite mindset is like, okay, this is the most shoe that's most economical to me, but it's the heavier, bulkier shoe, and I'm going to, for some reason, go to a lighter shoe that's not helping me as much in economy for the shorter stuff. I think that's probably the counterintuitive part that I see people kind of discussing more now. The tricky thing is, like I said, because you have to measure economy strictly as like the aerobic component, and you need people slower than threshold pace, that kind of, from a direct application standpoint, we can't go measure you at 5K pace or at mile pace. And so people kind of say, well, surely I need the lighter spike or something for that distance then, right? And that's trickier to figure out. I think that's where like more time trial based comparisons would be helpful, doing those in a more controlled way. I think we could also look though at faster individuals who have tested at those faster speeds, right? So I can't go test myself from a running economy standpoint at 5-minute mile pace. But we've got, data on faster runners, or we know there's faster runners. I've got internal testing, Kipchoge, runs 4:30 something pace in his Alpha Fly sub 2 attempt, right? Well, if that's helping his economy at 4:34 pace, right? Most athletes would be more than happy running 4:34 pace for a mile or a 5K or 10K, right? At those distances, we maybe at those speeds, we can't necessarily test them at, but if it's improving economy in other people, it stands to reason to me, at least, that those speeds are still, economy in that shoe is going to be helpful at those speeds as well. So I think I'm working on some pilot stuff on kind of addressing some of that and see if we can figure that out. I'm interested in it. World Athletics banned they put 25 millimeters stack height for track spikes for track races, for distance races on the track. And so that effectively, wearing these road racing flats on the track for international track events is not happening, right? But then you get the new foams and like the Dragonfly spike and such. But in the States, NCAA regulations don't have any stack height rules for races on the track. And so I'm interested in that, in the sense that my guess is that more collegiate runners should be wearing these like high stack road racing shoes on track races. It would be beneficial to them, and or the NCAA needs to consider like matching their rule with World Athletics. But it's trickier to do some of that work, given the faster speed stuff. But
and then something I've seen you mention actually on Instagram and in the study as well is how people maybe respond to different shoes based on their running form and things like that. I'm really interested in this because actually I love the Alpha Fly, and I think we are directly opposite in how our running styles are. But yes, I wonder if you can mention that. How much can it vary in terms of how much did it vary in your study and other stuff you've seen between one person in the Alpha Fly and another person in the Alpha Fly?
Two things on the kind of individual responsiveness I usually point out. One, there's variability in the sort of magnitude of responsiveness we see between individuals in a given shoe. But in this study, we didn't see big differences in responsiveness like across shoes, right? So like those top 3 shoes were the best shoes for just about everyone. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to make like the statistical conclusions that we did. So I always kind of clarify that in terms of individual responsiveness. So then let's say we do focus on those shoes that were top for most everyone. So what was the degree of responsiveness, I think is what you're getting at. And for those top tiered shoes in our study, it's like in the 2% to like 4.5% range on average. So the 2% responder not getting as much benefit, right, as the 4.5% responder. From there, we tried to kind of look at some of the characteristics of the high responders to the low responders in our study. And I think probably the chief thing that jumps out is like the top 50% of responders were less economical to begin with. Right. So it makes sense that they have like more, more gains to be made. Whereas the people who are already really economical don't get as much benefit as a shoe, which is kind of, interesting. Like if I was really economical, that would frustrate me because it's like my peers are closing the gap on me. Right. But I have very bad economy now. So my feet and Achilles tendons, I don't think have any elastic energy left in them. So the shoes help me quite a bit. So there's some interesting kind of like, is this fair kind of stuff in relation to those individual responses. But I think you could say that about any intervention, really. Some people respond more than others to one versus another. But we also tried to look at some of the like running mechanics characteristics. And we did see that those people who were the lower responders, who were more economical to begin with, also tended to be the people who had slightly higher cadence, slightly lower vertical oscillation, some things that maybe have been correlated to better economy in the past. So it's kind of like, I don't know, chicken or egg thing. Is it they're lower responders because of those running characteristics, or just because they're more economical to begin with? Whereas the people who were less economical to begin with tended to bounce a little more, have a longer stride length, lower cadence. And so really it's kind of speculation and it kind of discussion point in the paper, just in the sense that you really, to weed out some of those differences in responders versus non-responders, the fact that running economy is so multifaceted to begin with, you really need studies designed for that purpose, not designed to make comparisons between shoes, but designed to make comparisons between like responders, non-responders, which is going to require definitely larger samples when you start looking at that, because you have separate groups of people you're looking at. So you're saying you're a good alpha fly responder, you think, and you're a faster cadence guy, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'm a shuffler basically. I have a very, very high cadence and not very long stride length. I don't think I have a huge amount of that. I wouldn't say I have good running economy. I think people on the channel certainly seem to criticise me quite a lot. So that's partly because I heel strike. But yeah, I'm a real shuffly runner, and I found that I really like the alpha fly as kind of my preferred carbon shoe.
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't say heel striking automatically makes you less economical for one, but so on the idea of like the shufflers responding less to the alpha fly in our study, I think running speed is an important thing though. We were only testing at 16 kilometers per hour, 6-minute mile pace, right? And so my kind of working theory, if you get a shoe with really high stack foam, if you're not really compressing that foam, right, you're not going to like get the full benefit of its energy storage and energy return. So if you're running really slow, it would stand to reason that maybe it's less important, right? Or you don't need all of that stack. So even if you're a shuffler, I think the faster you're going, the more ground reaction force you're going to get, the more you're going to compress that foam. So I think shuffling at slower speeds, maybe less responsiveness, right? Shuffling at fat, I don't think you really can shuffle at. Didn't you just run like a 2:30 marathon, Nick?
Yeah. I'm reasonably quick. I've done a 2:29 marathon, a 2:33 the other day. So I think I'm putting a fair bit of force in with my shuffling.
So I don't think you can really shuffle too much at those paces. Relatively speaking, you might look more like you're shuffling than someone loping along. But I think that the ground reaction force component to that, maybe that's at least my working theory for now. I'm not a biomechanist, and I don't have like the instrumented treadmill where I can actually measure these like force components, but there's some ways to estimate some of those things. And some of like the correlational data I have on that, it seems like it makes more sense for like a high stack, really thick foam shoe like the Alpha Fly. But
one other question, I guess, sort of getting into that kind of slower runners or moving at slower paces, just looking at some of the things that you're sort of working on in the future. One of the things I sort of saw was maybe extending the study to look at people who might be moving slightly slower than those sort of 1735Kers.
Definitely. If you look at the speeds running economy has been tested out in these shoes, it's mostly 14 kilometers per hour and faster, which is sub-3 marathoners basically, right? And certainly there's a huge market for these shoes for people who aren't running sub-3 marathons, right? I looked at the numbers even at like just Boston the other day. It's like 60% plus of the field is not running sub-3 marathon, even at a competitive race like that. So, and certainly people are spending their money on these shoes at running slower paces. So yeah, that's kind of my next question is, does it make sense for people running at slower paces to run in these shoes? And so we're looking right now, we've got that study underway. We're looking at 10 and 12 kilometers per hour, which is basically 3:30 to 4:15 marathon paces. So quite a bit slower. And so we'll see. I think hypothesis there is probably less of a benefit, but maybe still a benefit. We'll see. And we're hoping, we're working on getting some crowdfunding. We're about to launch that to purchase women's shoes, because I only have my super shoes in men's sizes right now. So probably post that to our Instagram page soon. So hopefully there'll be some broad support to get women included in our study too. And then you might see differences if we're talking about differences in body mass and running mechanics between men and women. We might see some differences in responsiveness there. At the faster speeds that have been tested, we've seen women respond similar to men. But
you'd have to let us know. Hit us up with the link when that crowdfunding goes live. We'll stick it in the caption of the video below so we can, I think the more people we see involved in the study, the better. And we'd love it if you'd come back on and talk to us about it when you have some more findings as well. Nick, I know you had one more pressing question in relation to two shoes that Dustin has tested on himself.
Yeah, so I noticed, since the study, if you follow Dustin on Instagram, you'll be able to see him carry on testing other shoes. And there's been some interesting ones. I think the Puma and the Adios Pro all very exciting. But really, what happened when you tested out the Crocs?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm kind of I believe a lot in self-experimentation, right? So my lab rat rundown Instagram is kind of meant to share some of our more serious research findings, but also some self-experimentation stuff. And there's no short of subjective opinions about shoes on Instagram. So even if I'm providing some N=1 kind of objective data points, I think may be useful to the conversation. So yeah, I did test the Puma shoe, which didn't test as well as the Alpha Fly, but it did seem like it has a lot of promise. I wish there was more foam in that one, but the foam did feel pretty responsive. I wasn't a big responder to the Adios Pro 2, which doesn't mean that other people wouldn't be, but just I didn't seem to interact with that foam in that shoe nearly as well as the Alpha Fly. But yes, the Crocs were much more popular than any of those other comparisons. And I'm a pretty bad runner in the Crocs. I'll just say that. I think I was about 8% worse economy in the Crocs than the Alpha Fly. So, which there's some people, some novelty runners that have run really fast in the Crocs. So I'm assuming they're better in them than me. I think I needed thicker socks for my testing of the Crocs.
I saw someone actually ran, I think, a sub-3 at the London Marathon in Welly, so I think maybe you shouldn't let them in your polls, because people are going to vote for those ones, aren't they?
I can't wait for Crocs to launch their carbon-plated shoe, basically. That's where this is leading. That's what's coming next. Okay, well, Dustin, listen, thank you very much for joining us. It's super fascinating to hear your insights. And, I guess this is such a contentious kind of subject, and people are spending a reasonable amount of money on these shoes as well. So, yeah, thanks for doing the work to sort of help us and guide us with some sort of smarter buying decisions. We hope you'll come back on and join us again next time round, but thank you very much for chatting.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
So there you have it, some really interesting insights from somebody who's been doing actual science on how all those carbon shoes stack up against each other. If you have any questions about this video, hit us up in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be keeping in touch with Dustin to find out how his future experiments go, and we will bring you more news on the run testers when that happens. In the meantime, thanks very much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed, and yeah, we hope to see you again soon on the run testers.